table structures, he took me aside and he said, Robert, let me remind you, we're entertainment that happens to talk about business, not a business show that happens to be entertaining. Make it relatable. And when I got on TV, I got pretty good at making things relatable. But what I found, the cyber guy in me wasn't making security relatable. And when the cybersecurity industry shifted from being a technical thing to an executive corporate enabler, it worked really well for me and my company because we're very good at presenting. But I found a lot of my friends struggled. They were very good at presenting technical concepts, but now they had to go to a board meeting or they had to present to the CEO. And as much as I love cybersecurity, as much as you love cybersecurity, as much as everybody on this call loves cybersecurity, I've learned that what we do is not that sexy and exciting to people who don't do what we do. And so this shift began to happen in our industry about don't just make me safe, don't tell me the threats, but tell me how this enables our business. And I think that's one of the big things that we're learning now is that e-commerce, digitalization, cloud, these are all business enablers. And people that are doing well in our world are the ones that can take security and frame the conversation about how this helps your business, not necessarily about threats.
Robert, I think that's so insightful and that's so spot on. Increasingly, we as an industry talk about the importance of having a CISO have a quote seat at the table, engagement with the board, and just elevating the entire cybersecurity discipline out from just being a cost of doing business, but you put it as a business enabler. I think this is a great segue, Robert. You have so many experiences. You work with some of the world's top companies and are advising the U.S. and Canadian governments. Could you just start by sharing what are your thoughts on the evolving threat landscape and how do you see industry and our economies really responding to the threats?
Yeah, so, great question. What we find is everybody on this call knew that COVID was going to change our world. So there's nothing that's happening today, digitalization, e-commerce, cloud, work from home. There's nothing happening today that anybody on this call didn't foresee as a trend. What nobody saw was the compression of time. COVID has been the greatest compressor of time in history. While I saw remote workforces, while I saw people working that way, I didn't see all of these trends being compressed into 1 year. It's all happened now. And I used to say that business works at the speed of light. I now say business works at the speed of COVID. And so the more access, to generalize, the more access points, the more threats. I think we had a customer last year who had 18,000 employees and 15,000 worked from an office and 3,000 remote workers. That client went to 18,000 remote workers overnight, sharing a computer, working from home with all the security that enabled. And what that really did in our world is the perimeter has disappeared. There is no such thing as perimeter. We used to sell firewalls and we talked to firewall and load balance vendors about egress points and ingress points into your network. Today, there are 18,000 ingress and egress points. And so what that's done is it's amplified the threat landscape and it's amplified security. People like to talk about nation state attacks and certainly we're all seeing those go up. But isn't it interesting that the biggest issue for most companies right now is the simplest issue, which is ransomware. And 85% of all ransomware comes in through email and through phishing. I mean, would anybody on this call thought we'd still be talking about email and phishing 10 years ago? I mean, one of the first products we ever sold when I started this company was a product called CipherTrust and IronPort, which gave you email management and control. And here we are many years later talking about it. So I think we as an industry have done a really good job of escalating the importance of what we do. And we've also done a really good job of getting companies to accept that security is a journey, because I think up until recently, most executives expected that if you're secure, it's very binary, meaning I'm secure or I'm not. What we now realize is, it's not binary, it's a spectrum. You're never going to get to that point of full security where you cannot be hacked. But I think we have to accept a certain amount of responsibility around detecting threats. So detection and response has become even more critical. And just the final thing I will say is, while the perimeter is dead, identity is the new perimeter.
Yeah, those are all excellent points. And I think what you said about, did we ever think that 10 years later we'd still be talking about email security? That the same could be said about identity access management and cloud security. I mean, to your point, it seems as though while, as you articulated, we are now understanding more about the importance of cyber and prioritizing it, we also are still kind of fighting the same battles and talking about many of the same things. And I think that's why conferences like this and the work that your group and others do is so critical to continue to raise this as a high profile.
Parham, if you remember many years ago when Entrust first came out with PKI and certificates, we all thought the identity problem was solved. And today, I feel like identity is the fastest growing segment within cybersecurity. And you have so many new vendors around privileged access. And I love conferences like this. I mean, I would love it more if I was there in person, but I love conferences like this because I think one of the things that's really hard for all of us is we all go back to our office, we work in a silo, and we don't get to see what other people are doing. And I think that's one of the great things about InfoSec is we shine a light and learn from others.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. On that note, I wonder, in your dealings with different organizations and different companies, you've mentioned that cybersecurity is becoming a bigger priority, which is terrific. Do you see that actually translating into better security by design on technology products? I think one of the biggest challenges that we face as a society is that we're just introducing vulnerable tech into the wild, and we're prioritizing functionality and style and cost over security sometimes. What are your thoughts on that, and do you see us going in the right direction?
So I'm skeptical. And I think the really unique thing about our industry is the extreme degree of fragmentation. I mean, if you think about how many vendors there are, how many providers there are, I mean, interesting stat for you. If you take the managed security industry and you take the top 12 global leaders in it, including an IBM or people like that, you get 8% market share.
Wow.
Like, it's incredible to me. It's incredible to me. Like, sometimes I'm competing on a managed security deal with really big, credible companies, and then I'll be competing against a small regional player that I've never heard of. And large enterprises, in some cases, say, well, we know the guy, he's a good guy, we used to buy some stuff from him. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how does this happen? Like, can you imagine somebody building an office building and saying, yeah, I'm going to go with the, contractor. He's never built a building like this, but he's a good guy. He built my house. Like, it's incredible to me. And so I think that makes our industry challenging. The example I always use is, we all remember when McAfee was acquired by Intel. And I want to be careful what I say here because Dave DeWalt, who was the CEO at the time, is a good friend of mine. And it was a great deal. But the premise of that deal was that Intel was going to embed security at the chip level. But I remember when I heard that deal, I remember thinking the chip industry moves at the speed of the chip industry, and security moves at the speed of COVID, let's say. So if I embed on a hardware platform or a chip platform, or even at the very root level, by the time that product is out to the market, you and I are dealing with a threat that didn't exist when that happened. And so I think you have this fundamental dichotomy of speed. I just believe there's a flexibility in architecture and design that we need to have that you cannot embed at the hardware level. So long-winded answer, but no, I don't think we're going to see our phones come with chip level or our routers or hardware devices increase the level of security.
Great. I think you bring up excellent points, and it'll be interesting to see how the industry continues to respond. You know, given your work with CISOs, what are some of the things, I think you've outlined a few of them already on today's conversation, what are some of the top challenges that you see a CISO facing? Is it technical? Is it people? Is it both? I'd love your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a very technical field, and I love cybersecurity. I've been doing it since I was 21. It speaks to me. I'm deeply passionate about it. I feel like we all do good work. I feel like this is my closest chance to become Batman in my lifetime. So, I feel we do good. And I think the thing I love about our industry and the people I meet is I think predominantly people that get into our industry do it out of passion and do it out of goodness. I think that's one of the things that's unique about what we do is we really love it. So I think it's less of a technology challenge because I think there's great people in our field. I think that there's a lot of brilliant people in cyber that want to help. I think the challenges for most CISOs is there are too many solutions vying for limited budget. So we've talked about how important security is. We talked about executive level, but let's not forget, there is no CEO out there waking up and saying, oh my gosh, how do I spend another $1 million on security? Oh, today is the day I'm calling the CISO and seeing how I can give him more money. It just doesn't happen. Now, there's no CEO or board that's going to say security is not important. But this dichotomy of limited budget and limited funds still exists. And so now the challenge is you have this pot of money to spend on cyber, but there's a million products and they're highly fragmented. And which one do you spend it on? So I think that problem hasn't gone away. Along that line, one of the biggest challenges we find is around managing internal systems. It's very difficult to get people, as everybody knows. The unemployment rate is 0, and you're running a large enterprise, and you've got to manage this really complex stuff, and you've got to do it 24/7. Nobody wants to work at 2 a.m. So how are you going to do that? I mean, it's a bit of a self-serving answer because I'm in the managed security business, which is growing really quickly. The third area is identity. It goes back to this idea of the perimeter. How do I know Parham is really Parham? How do I know which applications you should be accessing? And so the challenge with identity is extreme complexity. I always say identity is the SAP of security. For those of us that have been in a non-security role, remember when we started in implementing SAP into our environments, it would never end. there is no SAP project that had a beginning and an end. It just went on forever. And that's identity. Identity is the SAP of cyber.
I think a lot of folks are nodding their head in agreement right now with what you just shared. On that note, then, what's some of the you laid out in a very articulate manner the different challenges. There's the budget challenge compared to the really complex ecosystem and just so many companies out there. You talked about the human challenge and the workforce challenge, and then you talked about the kind of continuum of cyber. What's some guidance you give then to CISOs who, to your point, are never going to have their CEO come to them and say, what more can I do for you? So how do they navigate the climate and get their priorities in front of the CISO and business leaders to make sure that they're most effective that they can be in their role?
Wow, that is a great question. That is, your question is the question everybody on this call should be asking. Because we live in a world where we cannot solve all the problems. And there's a great book, I think it's called, gosh, I forget what it's called, but there's this great quote in it that says, sometimes in business, you have to let the fire burn. Implying your house is on fire, you have a chance to go back in and save something. What are you going to save? And it goes along this idea, you got to let the fire burn on the rest. So I'm not advocating by any means that anybody let their companies burn with a threat. But what I am advocating is that you understand which is the most critical asset you need to protect and work your way backwards. Look, there's nobody on this call that is going to welcome a cyber breach. Nobody. But there's a spectrum of acceptable risk, meaning, yeah, you know, if I'm a retailer and somebody came in and breached our corporate network and saw some of our emails, uncomfortable, not great. But if somebody came in, breached our credit card data from our customers, that is a business changer. Like, that is something that we're going to start losing clients for. And so I think you've got to understand in your company, what is it? You've got that opportunity. The fire is burning. You can save one thing. What are you going to save?
It's interesting you say that. So one of my responsibilities here at the CyberRisk Alliance is to run one of our CISO communities. And so I'm involved in monitoring kind of the content and the priorities they have in these working groups. And what you just described is constantly coming up in the conversations we have with our Fortune 2000 members. And so that translates into third-party risk management programs, asset management programs. These are the things that we're talking about a lot within our organization and actually helping create CISO-developed guidance for our members. So what you're saying is really resonating, and I hear it literally every day within my community.
It's so interesting you bring up third-party risk. That is definitely a big gaping hole, I think, for a lot of CISOs. You talked about earlier is I've gone to meetings where people have a great strategy around their environment. They've really gotten on board with remote access, identity, everything. And then there's a contractor who does their vending machine, but has full access to the network.
It really blows my mind sometimes. And, it goes back to the famous Target breach, right? It was through the HVAC contractor, essentially, and how they got into Target and created all that exposure and all that enterprise loss and PII loss. And so, yeah, you're spot on. These are the things we need to be focused on. So, Robert, I'm interested. Do you see, kind of pivoting to Shark Tank for a little bit, you must see and hear so many pitches. I don't know if we see them all on TV or not, but do you see cybersecurity as a trend in kind of the product development? Are people thinking about it? And how do you see it just from an entrepreneurial perspective?
Yeah, Parham, it's so interesting. So I'll tell you a story. An interesting side note. I think in the 17 years I've been doing the show, I did it for 4 years in Canada. So the mean bald guy, Kevin, and I are Canadian. And we started the show in Canada. We did it here for 4 years. Then it came to the States, called Shark Tank. In Canada, it's called Dragon's Den.
Oh.
And the entire 17 years, I think I've watched maybe one episode in its entirety. I feel extremely uncomfortable about watching myself on TV. And I think it's because in my mind, I think I look like Brad Pitt. So I think when I think of me going out in the world, my mind thinks that's what the world sees. And then when I turn the TV on, I see the reality of it, and I find it shocking. So I think it hurts my ego. That's why I don't watch. One of the greatest areas to be in. I always say to entrepreneurs, if you want a job for a lifetime, go into cybersecurity. You will never be unemployed. We are not even at the tip of the iceberg of what's going to happen in our industry. We are going to become a force. And so there's so much opportunity because of that fragmentation, because of the macro conditions, because of the tailwinds. It's a great field to be in. From a Shark Tank perspective, it doesn't play well for TV. The one thing we learned after our second season, there used to be much more technical pitches on our show. And, Mark Cuban will tell you he's very technical, and he loves to throw out things like AI and crypto, and I kind of let him run on with that because it makes him feel very technical. But the reality is what we do, you have to have a certain level of expertise for. And I love that about our industry. Like I can go out tomorrow and sell real estate. I'm highly confident I could learn the real estate industry enough to survive pretty quickly. The top real estate agent will not survive in our field. At the end of the day, you have to bring a certain amount of knowledge and expertise into what we do. Now, as a business person, that's great because the barrier to entry is very high. But from a TV show perspective, you are not going to see a lot of pitches around identity or access management or third-party risk or compliance products.
Well, maybe we have an opportunity to create a cyber Shark Tank within InfoSec world coming up, so we'll have to talk about that. Speaking of that, and this is kind of just a fun, unrelated question about Shark Tanks. I know a lot of folks are really interested about your experiences. Can you share just one of the most memorable maybe pitches or experiences you've had being part of that program?
Yeah, interesting side note, because people love the show. So the thing I'll tell you is I love being on the show. And I love being on the show because it speaks to so many people. Like, the thing about being my age, and as you get a little more successful, you kind of get a little jaded. Like you kind of walk in and you think, this is good, but how are we going to get bigger? And then you get on the show and you sit there and somebody walks in and they have that life-altering moment. And I got to tell you, all five of us, we get so inspired by that because everybody has had those moments when we were starting out where it meant everything. I get this deal. I get this job. And it changes the trajectory of my life. And that's what Shark Tank is. We give that opportunity. What people don't realize is our show is absolutely real, meaning when the doors open, it's the first time we've ever seen people. There's no script. There's no background. The first question is always, what's your name? We don't even know their name. The average pitch is over an hour. And no matter how long or short, it gets edited into 7 minutes. But to answer your question, the most memorable pitch for me personally was probably a product called Tipsy Elves. And it was in our second year, and I was going through this phase of, why am I on the show? I'm not seeing any cyber pitches. This isn't real businesses. And these two guys came out and had a product around inappropriate, ugly Christmas sweaters. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing here? And I didn't understand it, but I had this epiphany that the power of our show is if you can create a product that touches consumers and has a loyal brand, you can really take off. And so I invested in it. They were doing 600,000 a year in sales at the time. And I think I bought like 15% or something. Today to do 100 million a year.
Wow.
And I love that. And and you know, that's America, and that's the opportunity that everybody has. Pure online company, no advertising expense, and no salespeople.
That's terrific, and you're correct. I mean, that really is the opportunity and the American dream that kind of our society creates. And to your point, I was actually, while you were talking, you brought it up. I was wondering how social media and Instagram and now TikTok has really kind of changed the strategy for a lot of the companies that you must be working with. So that's got to be really interesting to have watched that evolution over the years.
It is. It's really changing. But I want to be the first to say TikTok is going to die, because when Barbara Corcoran becomes a TikTok expert, you know it's the beginning of the end. You know that platform is not going to be cool anymore.
I'm still a TikTok noob. I don't even have an account yet. So, you know, you brought up some really interesting comments about, you know, inspiration and innovation, and going back to our you know, focus here on cyber. What is it that you want to leave our audience members with? I know we're kind of coming to our final few minutes together. You mentioned over the course of our conversation, the industry's fragmented. You talked about some of the challenges and what they need to do to overcome those challenges to be successful and defend their organizations against ransomware or nation-state threats. So, you know, what are your words for the attendees who may be feeling frustrated and may not be feeling like they're getting enough support and making enough progress?
So I will leave you with something I learned on Shark Tank a long time ago. And we had somebody pitching us, and they were a little bit arrogant and a little bit full of themselves. And I think they were speaking to Lori or Barbara, and they were being rude to them. Well, not, you know, rude, but a little testy. And I made a comment, which I think is really true, in trying to stand up for them. Not that they need me to stand up for them. They, you know, they're good to go. But what I said to the entrepreneur, because he was complaining we weren't listening to him. He was complaining that we weren't getting what he was saying. And so he kept trying to explain it and was getting frustrated that we weren't getting it. And I said to him, I said, listen, let me tell you something. It's not my responsibility to hear. It's your responsibility to make yourself understood. And I think that applies to cyber. We all love what we do, but we all have to make the transition to taking complex issues and converting to business issues. And I think the complexity and the technical side of what we all do will never go away. Like, anybody successful in our field has to be a technologist. I'm a technologist, you're a technologist. But to help your organization, you have to become a business person. Doesn't mean you have to become an accountant or a salesperson or whatever, but you have to understand how what we do affects the business of the company that you're helping.
Gosh, I couldn't think of better words to end on. And again, we talk about that so much within the CISO community that I'm privileged to lead here at CRA. So, Robert, thank you so much. I think this was really was a great way to kick off day 2 of InfoSec World. And we look forward to having you hopefully come back when we're back together in person and doing this face-to-face.
I want to meet human beings. Please have me back. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you, Robert. And everyone, enjoy the rest of your conference.